So, this past Sunday, I visited St. Timothy's Anglican Church in Spring, Texas. I chose this church because I had been looking for an Anglican church, and this one had some really good reviews online. They also had a late service in which they played contemporary praise music, and this is a style of music that really speaks to me. So, I decided to take a visit. Now, I've been having some health issues with my back and my joints, so it took me a while to get from the parking lot to the front door, and I entered a few minutes late. And the ushers, they were really nice. They welcomed me, thanks for coming, etc. They showed me inside, gave me a bulletin, and I wasn't really sure where to sit. And so a church member, he waved me towards him, and I went ahead and I sat a few pews up in front of him. And the music was really interactive, and the people, they were standing up, they were clapping, moving around, singing. And because of my back and my joint problems, I wasn't able to do all of that. So instead, I stayed in my seat and I just sang along. But mostly I just watched because I was new. I took notes during the sermon, and I really got a kick out of when they had this children's choir up there singing. It was really nice. It was a nice experience, and I was feeling really happy, really content that I had chosen to attend. And during the confession, people were kneeling, but again, on account of my back and joints, I just sat. And the deacon was speaking, and the worshipers, we all joined in on the corporate confession. Well, all of a sudden, I felt this grabbing on my arm, and I saw that my bag was being taken. Now, just for perspective here, this is my bag. It's a Bad Bats Maru cartoon tote bag. And to give a perspective here, this is a textbook. Just, for the comparison here, it's the size of a textbook, just like about that. So, anyway, so I didn't know what was going on. This bag, it has all my things in it. Mostly it's medication and water. And for a second, I thought I was getting robbed. Well, I looked up, and there were two police officers. One was pulling me up out of the pew by my arm, and the other one was over at the church door. And I was physically removed from my pew, marched to the back of the church in front of everyone in that area, out through the narthex, and then through and then out front through right in front of all the ushers, and then out the door into the parking lot. And all this happened in full view of everyone who was in the choir, all the clergy, all the worship assistants, and so on. And there were two officers, a white male and a black female. And the female was not speaking. She was just watching. And I could tell she was really mad. The white male officer, he questioned me about 5 minutes. Mostly he wanted to know why I was at the church. Why I was at the church. I was at church to go to church. But he wanted to know why I was at the church. And then he opened my bag and he searched it. And I asked him, I said, who called the police? Why did they call the police? What was going on that made them call the police? And he started it out. He said, well, don't take this personally. Then he went on and he gave me this ridiculous explanation of how the ushers placed a call to 911 because, one, they didn't recognize me, and two, I was sitting down in the pew while everyone else was standing and kneeling. And so I was standing there in disbelief that somebody actually called the police for that reason. And in this almost comical way, he said, well, if you ever decide to join this church, just know they're trying to keep their building safe. And he went on to talk as though this happens all the time, that I'm not the first person St. Timothy's has called the police on to remove. And then he said, well, that I could go back inside. And I realized at that moment that I could either storm out to my car and be that guy who was kicked out of church that everyone's going to talk about after the service is over, or I can turn around and go back inside. And that's what I did. I went back inside. Now, at this point, the initial shock was wearing off, and I was shaking. I had the tears starting up, but I was also mad. And I wanted these ushers to see just how upset I was over what they did to me. And you should have seen the shocked, disgusted look on their faces, like, how dare I turn around and come right back into their space after they tried to have me kicked out. And the messed up thing was that as I walked back inside past this gauntlet of gawking faces, two of these ushers had the nerve to trail me back inside, then tried to shake my hand, give me this lame-ass explanation of, oh, well, we didn't recognize you, and we felt threatened because you were sitting down in your pew instead of standing up and kneeling. They were talking like this was a normal thing, like they call the police on every single person who comes inside. And I shut that down real fast. I just put my hand up and I said, no. Just stop. Don't even try to speak to me. And so, of course, they got all huffy about it. Well, we didn't know you. You shouldn't be mad. You should be thanking us and apologizing to us for making a fuss. You should be thanking us for trying to keep this place safe. And it was like how you hear about these racial profiling cases where some white person sees a black person and calls the cops on them out of some irrational fear. They want to be the big man, the hero, who, as soon as the cops show up, instantly realize that he fucked up. And then to save face comes up with some stupid nonsense reason of why they called the cops in the first place. That's what this was like. Now then, the passing of the peace started, and at this time, and so that took a good 3 or 4 minutes. And two of the priests, because there were like 5 or 6 priests at this church, they came over and they started talking to me. And they were saying how they saw what happened, they were sorry it happened to me. And a few of the parishioners, they came over and they expressed their concern with what happened. And I appreciated that to an extent. I mean, it wasn't their fault that the police were called. They were not personally at fault. They didn't call. They didn't make that call to 911. But what I was thinking concerning the priest was, damn, you saw me taken out of here, and you just watched. You didn't even try to help. And this wasn't even a concern until you saw that I came back inside and I made it your concern. But if I had just turned around and walked away when the cops let me go, I would have just been some guy who got kicked out. But since I walked back inside and you have to look at me face to face, now all of a sudden you want to be all caring and concerned about what happened? No. And what was really interesting was that the offertory anthem had the line in it, Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. And all I could think was how untrue that was. The Holy Spirit could never exist in a place where this kind of stuff happens. So I stayed for the entire service, and I participated in communion, really just to do what everyone else was doing. But I felt so emotionally drained at this point that I may as well not have. So on the way out, I got into the greeting line, and all the rector said was, well, I saw what happened. Yeah. Maybe we're too sensitive. And I was thinking, are you serious? No apology, no explanation, no genuine concern that I had been publicly humiliated. Just the same ridiculous excuse that I got from the police and from the ushers. That I was a stranger. I was physically unable to stand and kneel at certain points and do what everyone else was doing. Therefore, they had to call the police. So I just told him he didn't have to worry about me anymore, that I'd never be coming back. And the next priest gave me a hug, and he asked for forgiveness. Forgiveness. As though I'm supposed to just look and say, oh, ha ha ha, it's okay. I'm sorry to make a fuss. I forgive you. Hell no. I don't forgive him or anyone involved in this. And why should I? It's like he knew this situation was messed up. He knew it wasn't okay, but he needed me to forgive him so he could feel okay about what his church did to me. And I just told that priest, I said, you're not going to see me again. And I left. And after I got home, I sent an email to the rector and the bishop, and I told them what happened. And I did it mostly to share just how sad and upset I was, how humiliated and angry I was, just how absolutely hurt I was. And I asked why they thought it was appropriate to call the police as their first line of defense, just because they didn't recognize someone. If they felt I was out of place, or as the police said, they were concerned as to why I wasn't standing and kneeling, why didn't they come sit next to me or even say hello? Why didn't they come ask if I was okay? Why did they wait an entire 30 minutes and then have the police disrupt an entire worship service? That doesn't make any sense. And the response from the bishop was just that same ridiculous excuse. Oh, we're really nice people, and you just need to understand that we live in a dangerous world. He also mentioned that my backpack was a cause for alarm, and I responded by showing him again a picture of my bag that I use to hold medication and water that is no bigger than a standard textbook, so that he could see that it's not a backpack. And I reminded him that according to the police and to the ushers, the call to 911 was placed because I was a first-time visitor and because I was not standing and I was not kneeling at the appropriate times. Those were the only two reasons given to me. Aside from searching my bag was never mentioned as the reason the call was placed. And he wrote me back and he said, well, he hears me, he understands that I'm hurt and that I'm upset, and he'll look into the matter. And that's really all I wanted was to be heard and for somebody to look into the matter. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine who's Latino, and he had a good laugh about this, and he said, George, now you know what it's like to be racially profiled. And I thought about this for a minute, and I realized in retrospect that he's right. This was probably just a matter of racial profiling. You see, all these mass shootings we hear about are committed by white males. And here I was, an unaccompanied white male, sitting down when everyone else was standing or kneeling, doing something else. And I had a messenger bag, which I guess you could put a weapon into. We also know that white people seem to always be the ones calling the police, doing the profiling, and this congregation was like 99% white. And even though I was dressed appropriately, my mannerisms were the same as everyone else, that I was acting like a normal person, they got scared and they assumed that I was up to no good. And when I think about the look on the black officer's face during this whole ordeal, I can see that this was profiling. She got it. She knew why they called. She knew that the ushers were in the wrong for making the call to 911. Now, 2 days ago, I went to the Lord of the Streets Thanksgiving service at Trinity Episcopal in Midtown Houston. And the first thing I noticed was the praise music. It was the praise music that was played at St. Timothy's on Sunday was some of the exact same music being played at Trinity that afternoon. The same thing. But this time, when they said, "Holy Spirit, you are welcome here," you knew that the Holy Spirit was present. Lord of the Streets, it's a homeless ministry, and this church service was about 50% regular members and 50% homeless people. People with large backpacks, people with bicycles, heavy coats. Nobody was calling the police on them. I don't think it would ever cross any of the priest or the usher's minds to call the police on these people. Now, in reflecting on this entire incident, I can understand that churches do have to be on alert anytime a new person comes through the doors. But putting your ushers in charge of policing the place and giving your ushers the leeway to call the police on everyone who comes inside, that's not the best way to go about keeping your church safe. I noticed that Trinity they have an armed security guard stationed near the church entrance, and he's there to respond to emergencies as they arise. And that might be something that St. Timothy's should consider. Or maybe having a blanket ban on all purses and bags and so on if that was their actual concern. Or maybe even have segregated seating for visitors so they can be monitored. But don't call the police on a guest for no good reason. They knew what they did was wrong, and they just don't want to admit it. They're too embarrassed to admit that they made a mistake. Now, I will say that one good thing that came out of this is that it's prompted me to really think about profiling in a different way. You know, it hurts deeply. It's unfair. It's destructive to the person who's profiled, and it's destructive to the community that you're trying to protect. Now, I was lucky in that my bag was searched, I was questioned, and then I was free to go. But imagine if I had been a black visitor to St. Timothy's. I would have been placed in the back of the vehicle during the questioning. I probably would have been arrested. But I definitely would not have been allowed back inside, that's for sure. So where we're at this point is that the bishop said he'd look into it. Now, honestly, I don't think the bishop will. And I don't have any faith that the rector is going to take this up with the ushers. It would be nice if somebody would just take accountability that maybe they overreacted. But I know that's not going to happen. The folks over at St. Timothy's Anglican Church are the kind of people who have to be right. And nothing will ever convince them that they made a mistake. So at this point, this is really between the church leadership, the worship assistants, and God. And I wish them the best, because if they ever hope to grow their congregation, they need all the help they can get. And they're going to have to do some serious reflection and discernment about how they welcome guests into their space.